Well, everyone, welcome to another one of the C.A.R.B Hall of Fame inductee videos for 2016. And today we are here with Bob Baker. And boy, what a privilege, Bob, for us to be able to actually come out to the C.A.R.B Hall of Fame Museum here in Johnson County, out here in Kansas, Olathe. You and I walked around a little bit over there, pretty neat displays.
It's a wonderful place. I hope everybody that gets to watch this video has a chance to come to the C.A.R.B Hall of Fame and enjoy the cars and everything that's on display here. This is my first time here, and I'll be back. It's a wonderful place.
Right behind us, we have one of John Lane's restoration jobs. I think it's Wes Farron's car. Just a beautiful piece of racing memorabilia. Like I told someone a while ago, probably never looked that way any day it was on a track.
You know, most of the cars inside our museum at the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame and Museum never looked as good on the racetrack as they do when they're all fixed up to come into the museum after the cars are retired. So I think it's the people, the people who craft the cars, who do all the work and restore the cars, the restorers, that put a lot of emphasis into making sure the cars are period historically correct, right, but making sure also that the chrome is very nice and shiny too.
Plus, I don't think they had clear coat in those days, so
that's true.
That probably helps a lot too. But Bob, first of all, let me be one of the first to congratulate you on being nominated to go into the C.A.R.B Hall of Fame. I know you've got to be honored.
Thank you, Mike. It is very humbling to be asked to be an inductee of the Central Auto Racing Boosters Hall of Fame, and I'm really honored to be a member of the Hall of Fame as an inductee. I have a long history with C.A.R.B, and it means a lot to me. As a youngster going to the races, I would always watch the C.A.R.B nights at the races, and even went to a C.A.R.B banquet when I was about 17 years old. So back at the old National Guard Armory in Kansas City, Kansas, when the banquets were held there, and C.A.R.B's just always had a special place in my heart. I've been a member for years and years and have a lot of friends in C.A.R.B, so it's a real treat and honor for me.
Your dad kind of started this racing thing with you, and what I would like to call a subliminal moment in your life as an infant. Your dad takes you to Olympic Stadium when you're 2 years old, and on that particular night, A.J. Foyt wins one of his first midget races. Like I say, kind of implanting something in your head about racing, but it must have really stuck.
You know, my mom and dad used to take my brother and I to the races when we were very small. Even before I was 2 years old, I know that my dad and my mom had taken me to Olympic Stadium to see the midget races on Sunday night. And I remember very little about, you know, A.J. Foyt's first USAC midget win at Olympic Stadium in 1957. But I know my dad never let me forget it. He always reminded me on the way home. I remember that. And several times later that I'd seen one of the greatest drivers in auto racing win his first USAC midget race in Kansas City at Olympic Stadium. And back in those days, a lot of the popular Indy 500 drivers would come to Kansas City on Sunday nights to race at Olympic Stadium, because the best drivers in the country would pop in at Olympic Stadium on a Sunday night to race the midgets against the other best midget drivers in the country. So it was a great era to be able to go to the races as a youngster and see all those great drivers that developed in Kansas City and went on to become national heroes.
And that tradition kind of carries on with you and your brother, because I think you were telling me that around the age 16 or so that you and your brother still were attending Olympic, going down to watch the races. Can you tell me, can you remember just a couple of the names of the guys that might have been there?
I know Randy Sears was one of the racers back in those days. Dick Howard, of course, Jerry Mook, Ray Lee Goodman, Tiger Bob Williams, just so many popular drivers, you know, around the Kansas City area that were just regular drivers that we would see at Olympic and Lakeside, the old Lakeside Speedway, Riverside, the Missouri State Fair, Marshall, Missouri at the Saline County Speedway. Just see those drivers every weekend and become friends with lots of the drivers and get to know them and their families. It was just a lot of fun.
Get to go down in the pits and get to talk with them. Also, you were saying, I think you mentioned it just a while ago, that you attended one of your first C.A.R.B banquets at 17, and it was over at the National Guard Armory. So you've had an association with C.A.R.B actually for quite a while. You've been around them.
I really have. As a youngster going to the races in Kansas City, I would always, you know, take note of the C.A.R.B nights when C.A.R.B would honor drivers and do different things, put a little bit of extra money into the purse. And I think they would give C.A.R.B jackets. And at one point, my dad took my brother and I to the Indy 500, and there was a night before the 500 USAC midget race, and a lot of the major Hall of Fame, not Hall of Fames, but the racing booster clubs would have a night there at the night before the 500 and present a jacket or cash to people that had made the feature or not made the feature, special presentations they made during intermission. I can remember seeing Charlie Heritage go out and present a Central Auto Racing Boosters Hall of Fame to USAC drivers for a couple of years at those races. And you know, that told me that Kansas City was on the map as far as the auto racing boosters, the Central Auto Racing Boosters, but also in the fact that they were represented, you know, the night before the Indianapolis 500. That was a big thing for me. So I've always been impressed and been a part of C.A.R.B ever since I was able to.
We have been so lucky, I think, to have C.A.R.B to help boost racing as well as what they're doing now with the museum as far as preserving racing. And it's really been good for Kansas City and Kansas City racers. So thank you, C.A.R.B.
Thank you very much, C.A.R.B, for all the fun that I've enjoyed with C.A.R.B, and especially for being inducted this year. I think that's very, very nice of the people who voted for me. Thank you very much.
In the next few years, you go to college and get 2 degrees, one in marketing and one in business. Now, this course will play into your future in racing a whole lot. And where did you receive those?
I've got a 2-year degree from Longview College, just an Associate of Arts. And then I got my 4-year degree from the University of Missouri in Kansas City, which was a business administration degree with a minor in marketing. Okay. And so I knew that I wanted to be in business. I had no idea what kind of business I wanted to be in at the time. And I was always interested in marketing. I think that came from going to the races to, as a youngster, I would clip out the ads in the Kansas City Star for the Sunday night races at Olympic stadiums. At one point I had boxes full of those old ads. I wish I still had those. It showed like a roadster type open wheel car. It might have been one of Greg Weld's old cars. It always had the purse featured and the ticket prices and what time and the address and a phone number. I can remember 7900 East Truman Road, Kansas City, Missouri. You know, it would say midget auto racing or super modified or short track nationals in the ad to get people interested to come to the races. And so I think maybe following the promotion and advertising for the races got my interest in marketing and how people marketed their events to get people to come and watch, to pay to watch the races.
Do you remember, were there any radio ads in those days? You're talking about newspaper, which was primarily the way to reach people because it went into everybody's homes. But radio was a big deal then. Did they do much radio advertising?
I can't remember very much radio advertising. I think the first radio advertising I can remember hearing myself for car races was probably when I-70 Speedway was first opened up, and the Roberts family had opened it, and they were running radio ads to get people to come out to the Saturday night pavement stock car racing, because at that time all the racetracks in Kansas City were dirt tracks. The Roberts, you know, of course, opened I-70 as a half-mile high-bank paved track, and it was something totally new. And so they used the radio, you know, to get people interested in it at that time.
Yeah. I guess one of your first jobs out of college was working at an NTB selling tires, and you told me that there was one promotion that you used with hot air balloons. What was that?
We took hot air balloons all across the country. I was responsible for, I think we had about 6 hot air balloons that were west of the Mississippi. So we had a Michelin balloon, a B.F. Goodrich balloon, a Goodyear balloon, a Pirelli balloon, and I think a Continental Tire balloon. And we would fly those over major events. And so a lot of times we would do them over outdoor festivals, music festivals. We would fly them over, you know, sporting events like Royals games, championship Royals games. We would try to either get the balloon sanctioned or put somewhere, stationed somewhere where people could see it, tethered, where people could see it exactly. We took it out to I-70 Speedway a few times. We had the balloon out at I-70 Speedway a few times, and we would give people rides. And of course, a lot of people don't know this, but you can't direct where the balloon is going to go. Once the balloon is in the air, it's at the mercy of the wind and the weather. So invariably it would come down in fields around, you know, out in Odessa around the racetrack, and lots of stories about, you know, cows and horses and different fields where the balloons would come down. And then the people would come back to the races course and enjoy a night of racing after their balloon ride, and tell us the stories about where the balloon landed and about the farmers coming out and everything. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to bring new people to the races, and it was always something different with the hot air balloons because, like I say, you never knew exactly with the weather where they were going to land and how things were going to work out. And we did it in Kansas City, Salt Lake City, Utah, and Phoenix were the 3 markets that I worked with the hot air balloons in. It was very educational for me.
It's all a learning process as we go.
It really is. I learned a lot about rights, visual rights, you know, where you could park the balloon and still be seen by the concert goers or sporting event goers and still have the rights to display that, but not infringe on the rights of the event that was selling billboards or selling sponsorship rights to people.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And, it just depended on, which piece of property you would set that balloon on, and the visibility of that property, and if you had the rights to be on that property. Well, if you had those rights, you were all set. I mean, you could park it right behind the Beach Boys at Poplar Creek Amphitheater and light up the balloon and tune with the music. As long as you're not on their property, you were okay. But if you were 10 feet over and on the property of the amphitheater, then you were infringing on their rights. So learned a lot about that.
In '87, you kind of get your feet wet a little bit in promoting racing, and this would start at the American Royal Arena, which I might say I attended a couple of those. I remember those. And also you were doing it at the Kansas Expo Center up in Topeka. Now, was or was not that, as I recall it, primarily go-karts?
They were modified midget races, and they used single and twin engines. So there was a 250cc class and then a 500cc class. So there were two classes. We ran them without the wings indoors, and they were very small tracks. They were dirt tracks. We had the dirt, of course, at the American Royal that they used for the horse shows. And then we hauled in the dirt in Topeka at the Expo Center and built the track the morning before the race, and I had races that night, and were responsible to get the dirt and everything back out after the races for an event the next day, whether it be a basketball game or something else at the arena.
Now, was that, I'm going to say seasonal or one-time event, or what was it?
We did them one time a year in the wintertime. They were winter events, and we marketed the event in Topeka, and I think we did in Kansas City also as the Winter Nationals.
Okay.
We called it a big indoor race, and we offered, back at the time, which $1,000 to win, and a $10,000 purse, which back in the late 1980s was a lot of money for the modified midget group, which now they race for a lot more money, but it was a lot of fun.
That was still a lot of money for back then, without a doubt. After 3 years promoting these races here in Kansas City and Topeka area, you start promoting races, or you moved to Plano, Texas first, and you go on board with the World of Outlaws, and you start working with Ted Johnson with that group. And there again, you're in charge of marketing, and some big names start coming on board with that group. And just to mention a few of them is Tums, Amico, is it Vivarin? I never know how to pronounce it.
Vivarin, yeah.
Vivarin, Bars Leak, Windsor Cigars, and Snap-on Tools. Was it difficult to get sponsors to come on with that group? Because one thing I've always noticed is it's not like it's the biggest billboard you've got out there to put stuff on. I mean, the wings, were these wingless or wing cars?
They were wing cars.
So was it difficult to get some of these guys to go with that?
The biggest difficulty to overcome in marketing the World of Outlaws was, at the time, not necessarily now I don't think, but back in the late 80s, early 90s, overcoming the name Outlaws and companies not wanting their name associated with that connotation of something that was against the law. I think people have grown to accept World of Outlaws now, and they don't have that connotation to overcome. But it was a challenge, because just like now, there's other sanctioning bodies and race teams and other sports that are trying to vie for those sports marketing dollars. So you really had to approach a lot of people, hundreds of people, to find maybe a half a dozen to 10 companies that would not only work with you and help you promote their brands, but also be good business partners and see that by passing out their products at the races, it would help grow brand loyalty, or by doing different things to activate their involvement with the sport, it would help their brands, their company sell more product.
And I presume these had to be national groups, because with the World of Outlaws, of course, they were never at the same track twice. So you couldn't really get much local advertising. It had to be national sponsored. We
tried to attract, and we were very successful at attracting national sponsors, because the series raced at the time, I think it was 108 nights a year across the country from California to New York. And so we had a lot of exposure at the facility with the race fans, but also the media that covered the World of Outlaws. There was a lot of print media that covered the World of Outlaws in the day, and even quite a bit on USA Today would cover the World of Outlaws, so there was good print exposure for those companies being involved.
In 1981, you start promoting races at the Missouri State Fair, and more or less you bring racing back to the fairgrounds. How difficult was that to do? I'm sure there had to be some sponsors and stuff involved in that. You also ran some races on the mile. Was that just like once a year? Because the only races I can remember were once a year they had a mile race at the fair.
Yep, it was 1991, and I just left working for the World of Outlaws, and the opportunity came up to get the lease on the Missouri State Fairgrounds race tracks, because there's 2 racetracks there, the half-mile track and the mile track. And so we were promoting races every Friday night on the half-mile track. And after the first year, we thought if we were going to continue to keep the mile at the fairgrounds in operation, we need to have at least 1 or 2 races a year. So at the end of the second year, we started a 1-mile nationals race, which we raced all 5 classes on the mile.
Oh my gosh.
We ran wing sprint cars, we ran late model stock cars, sportsman stock cars, modifieds, and street stocks, I believe, were the 5 classes. And it was a lot of fun. Having those cars on the mile track once a year, everybody was excited, and we got really nice crowds, and it was an all-day event. We showed up before the sun came up in the morning to start checking cars in, and the mile track had no lights on it, so a couple of times we were forced to not run a few of the feature events and just had to pay the drivers in the order they were lined up. But it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot and really enjoyed my days promoting the races in Sedalia. Again, I think part of that comes from my father taking my family to the fair in Sedalia as youngsters, and going to the Missouri State Futurity sprint car races on Sunday afternoons, and watching Jerry Blundy and Ray Lee Goodman and Tiger Bob Williams and all those great drivers race on that big mile track, and Bill Oots and another C.A.R.B Hall of Famer, just watching those guys and getting to know them and see them race at the local tracks and then race on the big track at the fair. The Missouri State Futurity, 100 laps on a 1-mile track, no fuel stops. It was a great show.
Yeah, it was. It was fun. Dusty, but fun, as I recall.
For some reason, I don't remember the dust that much back when I was younger. I remember they would race motorcycles in the morning in Sedalia. They must have started really early in the morning, because those races ended about noon, and they would start to let the fans in for the Missouri State Futurity, which were IMCA big cars, is what they called them, on the mile track. And I think they would open up at noon, and then they would have hot laps maybe at 1, qualifying at 2 in the races at 3 o'clock, and we were on the way home by 5 or 6, which was a long drive from Sedalia to Kansas City back then, because it was just a 2-lane road. Highway 50 wasn't a divided 4-lane road like it is now. And I can remember once, this probably isn't the greatest story, but my dad and my mom and my brother and sister and I, all the family coming back, we had the picnic lunch there before the race in the Missouri State Futurity race, and we're coming back, and believe it or not, there was a little old lady driving back on Highway 50, and she must have been going 30 miles an hour. And there were cars just lined up, and we were about in the middle of this pack of cars, and my dad was just shaking his head, what's going on, we're never going to get home. And about maybe 10-15 minutes later, a police car went by all of us and pulled this car over, and had the little old lady pulled over because she was stopping up the traffic for so long. When we got up and saw what had happened, my dad was just shaking his head like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that lady's going so slow. But it took us a long time to get home, and it was a 2-lane road there and a 2-lane road back.
Quite a bit of difference from then and now.
It sure is.
Especially the traveling part. So many more great highways to get where we need to go to this racing thing that we all love so much.
We take the highways for granted now, but I can remember back in the days, some of those roads, if you can imagine, the Weld family coming from Kansas City to race at Knoxville every week on a 2-lane road with open trailers. That was quite an adventure to get that 225 miles from Kansas City to Knoxville.
I was going to say, I think I can make it in about 3 hours. It had to have been 5 or 6 for them.
It had to be quite a bit of a drive, because not only were they just on a 2-lane road, but an open trailer with a race car behind them, and probably had to make some stops for gas along the way. So.
What I remember too about the fair, and I was wondering if you were associated with it, did you have anything to do with any of the IMCA late model shows that they had down there?
No, I can remember going to some of those with my brother to the fair races. They were called still dates because the fair wasn't going on. And like there was the Missouri Sprint Nationals that the Hassler family put on. But the IMCA stock car races I think you're talking about were during the Missouri State Fair with Ernie Durr and Rambo Stott and all those guys, Ron Hutchison, and all those great guys that put those on. I remember going to see Joe Wallace race in some of those races, and along with Marty Robbins. Back in those fair races. And then Marty would race during the afternoon with the stock cars and then sing at night at the Missouri State Fair as part of the entertainment on the grandstand. And those were great shows. I can remember Marty crashing his car one year in the afternoon on a Saturday afternoon. And I think Joe Wallace had 2 cars, and he went and either rented or bought the second car from Joe and raced it.
I think I was there that day.
Yeah, raced the car that afternoon and then sang on the stage that night. So Marty Robbins was quite an entertainer.
Yes, he was, in many ways.
Yes.
In many ways. Asphalt racing starts making its appearance. You mentioned this a while ago here in the Kansas City area. With I-70 being asphalt, and then I think a few years later, Lakeside was asphalt. But how hard a sell was that, like you say, talking about using the balloons and stuff like that? Because, boy, dirt tracks and dirt track racing had been so popular around here for so many years, and then for this asphalt deal to come around, it had to be kind of a hard thing.
I think to the credit of the Roberts family, they did a very good job of promoting I-70 Speedway when it was first opened and making stars out of the drivers that raced there. Freddie Whistler, Dave Wall, Joe Wallace, lots of the drivers that raced there. You know, they became very popular in the Kansas City area and around the Midwest. And I think people came to I-70 Speedway because it was different, because it was paved and not the dirt. I know Greg Weld put dirt on it for a few years and was very successful with racing there. But I can remember my father taking my brother and I out to the site where I-70 Speedway was being built. And before it was opened a few years, we could see where they had a big hill and they dynamited into the hill to build the banks and to build the seating area for the seats. And we watched them. We'd go out every once in a while, maybe a few weekends a year. You know, when the weather was nice, he'd drive us out there for a Sunday afternoon ride. And we saw the concrete forms for the grandstands and the bucket seats. They told us before the bucket seats were going to be put in there. And we had a hard time envisioning bucket seats, plastic bucket seats at a racetrack. So we were kind of there at the beginning when they were building the track and building the concession stands and all the areas around the track. And my dad did take my brother and I to the first race at I-70 Speedway they held. It was a Sunday afternoon race. I don't remember what year it was, but I remember it was late model stock cars and sprint cars on the same show. So it was kind of like a twin bill. And the place was packed because you had all the sprint car fans plus all the late model fans, the stock car fans. Wonderful crowds, great races, and just a lot of fun.
It really was. Of course, I forgot to mention that you go on and you are promoting both tracks. Now, did you do that at the same time?
That was in 1995 and 1996, and the tracks were still paved tracks back then. And yes, I promoted both Lakeside and I-70 Speedway at the same time. Actually, I managed the tracks for a gentleman who owned them named Ted Carlson. Ted was from up in Iowa, and he was an absentee owner. He loved racing, but he just couldn't leave his job in the vending business to manage the racetrack. So fortunately, he contacted me when I was in Sedalia in 1994 and asked if I would help him with Lakeside. And I said, well, I'll help you, but I still have a track here in Sedalia I'm really busy and having a good time doing. He said, well, I'm getting ready to buy another track too. I'm going to buy I-70 Speedway, so I'm going to have 2 racetracks. And I thought, boy, this is going to be a handful, because I was plenty busy with just doing the races in Sedalia. And so Ted was very convincing and talked me into going to work for him to manage both Lakeside and I-70. And 2 racetracks, running a Friday night at Lakeside and a Saturday night at I-70 Speedway was a handful. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of fun. We had a lot of great people that helped us with the races, put on the races, and I was very fortunate to be a part of that.
You were still dealing with a lot of the same racers, though, because I think most of the people that raced at I-70 also raced at Lakeside. So it wasn't like it was 2 different groups and you had to deal with bunch more different personalities, but still, I'm sure still difficult, because 2 tracks, it's about like a racer racing at 2 tracks. It's got to be really hard.
We were very fortunate in that Ted had a racing background and loved racing, and we agreed before I went to work for him that if we were going to do both tracks, that we would make the rules the same at both tracks for all the divisions. So a guy could race the same car at Lakeside on Friday night and bring it out to I-70 and just adjust on the car. We had the same tire rules, the same engine rules, the same body specs. So a guy wouldn't have to do a lot of changing on the car. And I think that is one thing that promoters sometimes don't do a lot so much. When you have the same owner at 2 tracks, it's pretty easy, but most racetracks are owned by different people, and to get the 2 sides to agree on the same set of rules, it's kind of hard sometimes.
Even to this day, you still talk to some racers who raced at I-70, and I almost compare it to, like you say, sprint car fans and late model fans or modified fans. The asphalt fans were, I think, kind of thought the people that ran dirt were, I don't want to say a lower class, but were different than what they were as asphalt fans. There was a separation there.
I saw a little bit of that when I-70 Speedway was first built, and it was the first asphalt track in the area. But what I noticed more and more from going to the races, because I would go to Knoxville on Saturday nights, or Tulsa on Saturday nights, or Riverside on Saturday nights, or I-70 Speedway. There were 4 tracks we had a choice we could go to, so we were very blessed with an opportunity to see different types of racing. But I noticed when I would go to the paved races at I-70, a lot of the same people that I would see maybe on Friday night at Lakeside would be at I-70 on Saturday. And that's when Lakeside was dirt and I-70, of course, was paved. And the same thing, a lot of the people I saw at I-70 Speedway on Saturday night were the same people I'd see at Saline County Speedway in Marshall, Missouri on Sunday night. So there was a pretty good crossover. Even though there was a little bit of a difference, there was a crossover of fans.
Like I say, it's kind of a unique situation, but since the asphalt is kind of fading away now, I think we're getting the asphalt fans back on the dirt side. But anyway, we'll move on. We'll leave that alone. You are responsible for bringing the NASCAR Truck Series, which I saw one of those races. It was just fantastic. I guess I almost felt like I was at Bristol or one of the small tracks where the NASCAR ran, and to have those trucks in there, just a fantastic experience is all the only way I could explain it, because this was before Kansas Speedway. USAC sprints come in. I mean, there again, you got to see some of the guys that run in Indianapolis that ran the USAC Sprint Series. Fantastic. ASA late models. There again, just another proving ground for so many NASCAR drivers that went on from that series. But you were responsible for bringing those in to I-70. It was really a unique experience, Bob.
We could probably take credit for the truck series. At the time it was called the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. And when the series first came out the first 2 years, we were fortunate to secure dates from NASCAR to have those trucks come out and race at I-70 in the afternoons and have the races televised live. And that was a great learning experience for myself, having the live TV with both the trucks and then TNN for the ASA races. But the Roberts family that opened I-70 Speedway originally had the USAC sprint cars there. I can remember watching Greg Weld and Bentonhausen and all those great names race at I-70 Speedway back in the day. And my dad, again, would take my brother and I to those. And the great ASA stock car races with Dick Trickle and Bob Seneker and Mike Eddy and Mark Martin.
Mark Martin was one I was trying to think of. Thank you. I couldn't think of it.
Terry Bivens and Rusty Wallace and all the Wallace brothers that would race at I-70. Those were great experiences as a youngster to grow up and see all those drivers to develop into national names, thanks to the Roberts family and other people who promoted the races in the Kansas City area. The truck race at I-70 Speedway that we did, it was unique for myself in that we'd sold almost all the tickets in advance. We had all the seats reserved for the truck race, and we had very few tickets left to sell because it was such a popular new thing for NASCAR, and to have them in the Kansas City area before Kansas Speedway was built. We had great crowds. We were blessed with very good weather, and we just had a lot of fun doing those events, and they were good races. Remember, I think Mike Skinner won one of the first races, and it was just really a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think that's the one I was at. I think Skinner won, if I remember right. Just a fantastic day. I think it was a Sunday. Is that correct? Saturday or Sunday?
It was a Sunday or Saturday afternoon. I remember that. Might have been a Sunday afternoon.
I was thinking it was. It was pretty hot, but man, it didn't bother me. I mean, I was just so enthralled, I guess is the word, of watching that. It was just fantastic. Thank you for doing that.
It was a hot day. I remember we all poured a lot of beer that day. We really did. The people were lined up at the beer stands, and the owner of the track, myself, and anybody else that we could get to come in and help us. We had lines of people buying beer and soda pop, and everybody pitched in. And it was a real group effort. It was a lot of fun.
And live TV. That had, like you say, quite an experience.
Live TV was a lot of fun. One of the things I remember about the live TV is we'd set up some fireworks to go off in turn one at the start of the race. And so, the national anthem's going and the invocation, everybody's getting ready for the race to start. Here's the fireworks guys at I-70, sitting on that wall up there in turn number one, and they're waiting for the national anthem to end and the cars to start. And so we hear over the radio, hey, we can't start this race. There's some guys standing outside of the wall in turn number one. And so I said, that's okay, they're with the fireworks crew. And they go, well, they can't stand by that fence. I said, as soon as the race gets started, they're going to shoot the fireworks and they'll move. And they'll go, oh, so they're like part of the show. It's like, yeah, they're going to shoot the fireworks. They're not going to stand by that wall. They're not going to stand by that wall when the race starts. And sure enough, they shot the fireworks off and everybody enjoyed it. And they moved away from the wall and the race started. So it was quite a deal. The TV people were so nervous about so many things. They wanted everything just right.
Yeah. That's the way video guys are. During this time frame, you are also working with PBC, doing marketing with them, and this also is taking place down in Texas. Could you explain just a few of the events that you were working with on that? Sounds like quite a deal.
Yeah, I left the Kansas City area after doing Lakeside and I-70 together, and it was probably back the late 90s, and I went to work in Texas for a company called PBC Marketing. And we did fairs, festivals, and special events. And what we did at those events was we did demographic research to help the organizers of the events fine-tune their marketing to better tune in on what type of advertising and marketing attracted people to their events. We asked the event goers if they were interested in TV, they heard an ad on TV to come to the boat show, or if they heard an ad on the radio to go to the Texas Folklife Festival, or if they heard an ad saw an ad in the newspaper maybe to go to a Better Homes and Gardens home show. We did over 100 events a year, and some weekends we had 5 and 6 events going on, and we stayed very busy with that. There were lots of events in Texas, just like there are here in the Midwest, that are kind of unique to the area. Like in Independence, like what is it called? Salicon Days, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And
Santa Caligan.
Santa Caligan
Santa
Days.
Caligan.
In Texas, there was a big event called the Worst Festival, and it's W-U-R-S-T, not worse as in bad, but it was a 10-day salute to sausage, and it was a German festival, and it was a great event, and it attracted hundreds of thousands of people, and it was lots of oompa music, and so we had survey stands all over that place, and we would have to actually get large garbage bags to get the surveys out of there after that 10-day salute to sausage. It was a wonderful family event. A lot of beer was poured at those events, and a lot of families had a great time.
You'll have to excuse me for laughing. It just sounds funny, but
I know.
anyway.
You hear the worst festival or the worst event, and you think it's a terrible thing, but it's not. It's like bratwurst, like a sausage.
It's like a sausage.
Like a sausage event.
In 2005, you returned back to Kansas City, and a job comes along with one of the biggest names in Kansas City racing. And of course, that's Weld Wheels, and they are doing business with everybody in racing. I mean, is there a racing vehicle that they did not build a wheel for?
Greg Weld and Taylor Weld and everybody at Weld Racing built race wheels for race cars of any type. Greg's passion for sprint car, midget open wheel racing started the whole thing where he started to build wheels for people for himself. He needed some wheels, and he couldn't get any, so his dad said, why don't you make some? So Greg made some wheels for his own race car, took them to the races at Olympic, and people asked him where you got those wheels. I could stand to buy some new wheels, and those are pretty nice. And he said, well, I made them. And so they asked Greg if he'd make some for them, and next thing you know, he's making wheels.
That's how it started.
That's how the whole thing started. And by the time, I went to work, he had a wonderful machine built at Weld Racing down on Stadium Drive to build racing wheels for drag race cars, everybody from John Force down to the door slammers. It didn't matter what type of a race car, if it was a USAC Silver Crown car, a drag racing car, for short track racing, midgets, sprint cars, modifieds, late models, you name it, mini sprints. They built wheels for any type of race car, and they were and still are the #1 wheel company for racing.
Yeah, I know they were connected with NASCAR quite a bit too.
Yep, as a matter of fact, when I started there, Taylor and I actually got Weld Wheels involved in NASCAR racing, and we were selling wheels to Joe Gibbs Racing and Tony Stewart and those guys at the time, and Hendrick Motorsports and Jeff Gordon and those teams. So we had a pretty strong hold going on the wheel market in NASCAR when the actual bottom fell out of the whole wheel industry thing for Greg, years after that. So we were just really getting where we had probably over half of the field in the NASCAR races running on Weld Racing wheels. And NASCAR is really interested because here's a company that not only builds racing wheels, but also builds custom wheels for people for their cars, that they can take the Weld wheel out and take it to a car show. And it was really exciting for NASCAR and for us to be a part of that, for Taylor and I to go down and to walk into those shops and be able to talk to people about putting wheels on cars that are seen on TV every Sunday afternoon. And it was very, very good.
That's just what I was going to ask you. You had to have the opportunity to be able to go and talk to these people in all of these different fields of racing. That had to be so unique, Bob.
It was, and I think, one of the jobs that I had when I was fairly young, I worked for the Southwestern Bell Yellow Pages, and we talked with every type of business owner you can imagine, from the guy that owned a small shop where he was changing the oil in somebody's car to the CEO of an eyeglass company. And so I think I learned at a young age to be able to talk to people in all different types of business and walks of life, and that really has helped me in the racing. It really helped me at Weld Racing, because I would talk with everybody from John Force and his family, all the way down to the guy that just needed 1 or 2 wheels to go racing for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very good. It was very educational for me, and it was very rewarding to be able to help people with their racing careers, knowing that the wheel was a small part of their success.
If they don't roll, they won't get there.
John Force told me once, he goes, Bob, he goes, Greg Weld saves my butt every time I go down that quarter mile. He goes, I'm going, as fast as that car will go, and if he goes, that wheel comes apart, he goes, I'm going to come apart too.
Yeah.
He goes, so every time I take off, he goes, your company keeps me safe. And
keeps me safe.
That's a good feeling.
Yeah, no kidding. That sounds really neat. I like that. That is great. The dream job comes along, Bob, for you, as the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame and Museum in Knoxville, Iowa, offers you the opportunity to come up and work with them. And you are in charge of the day-to-day operations, as well as taking care of fundraising to help sustain the museum, because we know everything takes money. Sounds like a dream job, but man, there's a lot of responsibility there.
It is a lot of responsibility, and Don Lamberti, the founder of Casey's General Stores, kind of took me under his wing when I started to work at the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame and Museum, and he said, Bob, he goes, have you ever worked for a nonprofit organization before? And I said, no. Every business I've worked for has been a regular type of business where you work to make money. And he said, well, let me tell you, a nonprofit organization is very different. He goes, nonprofit organizations lose money. They don't make money. He said, this museum is never going to make money. He said, it's always going to lose money. He said, so your job is to bring in as much money as you can to keep the doors open for people to continue to come in and learn more about sprint car racing. And so Don Lamberti's fatherly advice to me in the business world about how to work, manage, and be around a nonprofit organization has helped me a lot. Don has a true love for sprint car racing, and of course his money, along with the money from the Marion County Fair Association there in Knoxville that puts on the races, and hundreds of other people that contributed to the wonderful building we have there in Turn 2, that 4-story building. It's really a testament to the people who have a passion for open wheel and sprint car racing.
Sprint car racing, exactly. I can remember way before it existed going to Knoxville to the races, and it seems like almost every night at the races they would take up a collection, to build the museum and to have it in place where it is. And all those people that contributed to that, first of all, just to get the whole thing started and get the ball rolling. But, I've only been there just a couple of times, but what a fantastic display of cars and memorabilia that has to do, like you say, with open wheel racing, even though it's a sprint car. I've seen super modifieds and, predecessors, I guess, to the sprint cars, displays in there. Just a fantastic place to go.
There really have been a lot of people that have allowed us to keep the museum open, first of all, to get it built, and then to keep the museum open. But what I think a lot of people don't realize about our museum is that the displays in the cars change pretty frequently. Most of the cars inside the museum are not owned by us, they're loaned to us. And so people loan them to us for 6 months to a year. So after that time period, we can get another set of cars to come in. So we're constantly changing the displays and the cars and the things we have in the museum, so people will want to come back more than once. They just don't say, oh, I've been to that museum and I've seen those cars and I don't need to go again.
Back.
So we want to keep it fresh. We change the cars in the front window and inside the museum pretty regularly, and we try to have different events going on there, our Sprint Car 101 programs, and we do a different Salute the Champion program every year. We pick a driver and bring in several of their vehicles and memorabilia, trophies, helmets, drivers' uniforms to showcase the history of sprint car racing. And our motto at the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame and Museum is to promote the future of the sport and preserve the past. So we are involved in some different aspects of sprint car racing where we actively are promoting the future. We worked with the National Sprint League last year on a promotion at 6 of their races to help promote the future of the sport and get that series off and going. We also do a program that's our North American Sprint Car Pole Awards to reward the current achievers in sprint car racing, and we do that with the non-wing sprint cars, the 410 sprint cars, and the 360 sprint cars every year. And we announce those winners at the Chili Bowl down in Tulsa, Oklahoma every January.
Fantastic programs, all of them. Like you say, help promoting racing as well as preserving the past. Bob, during this time that you've spent in racing and all different aspects of it, marketing, promoting, what have you. Have there been any, I will use the word unique individuals that you've dealt with, or any kind of a problem that was really hard to deal with?
Probably the most unique individuals I deal with are the people who have been around racing a long time. And the most fascinating part of talking to those people is to hear about, I like to ask people, can you remember the first time that you went to a car race and what it was like? And I don't know how I stumbled upon this, but I asked my father when I was young, can you remember the first time that you went to a car race and what it was like? And he said, sure. He said, we took the family car out and we parked it on a hill at a farm, and the cars ran around in a circle.
In a pasture.
In a pasture. He said there was no fence, no wall, no guardrails, just a bunch of cars lined up in a circle, and then cars racing in a circle, and the race cars, parked in the middle in the infield area. He said it was rather unorganized. It was an all-day type event. There were no lights. He said the admission was like 25 cents or 50 cents a person. He said, and when you would come back from it, he goes, you were filthy dirty from all the dirt flying and the dust. And he said, your car, he said, you never cleaned the family car before you go this because you knew it was going to be dusty and dirty afterwards. And if you parked around the turns, you might even get some clods of dirt thrown on your car. And so I really found an interest in that, how he and got into the sport as a younger person and got interested in it. And then, him taking myself. And so when I talk with people, I ask them a lot of times, can you remember the first race you went to, or can you describe going to the race, with a friend or with your family, and which track it was and what it was like? And I think those are stories of the history that are the fascinating past that kind of lead us to where we are now, with the super speedways and the wonderful facilities like Knoxville Raceway and the Lakeside Speedway here in Kansas City, and the track down in was it Wheaton, Missouri? Wheatland, Missouri, the Lucas Oil dirt track down there. Just wonderful facilities. You see across the country the wonderful track at Charlotte, the dirt track there, Charlotte Motor Speedway's dirt track, Paris Auto Speedway out in California. Just wonderful facilities that you see that are in operation, and now two tracks, up north of us that are going under multi-million-dollar renovations at Jackson Speedway and the new Badlands Speedway up in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. People pouring millions of dollars into short track racing, and it's kind of nice to look back and see the past, and then you can kind of look ahead and see, well, these new tracks are putting in new grandstands and Bose sound systems and big type of video boards for people to enjoy the replays on. And of course, we're so spoiled with our museum, with those suites on top of our museum, to be able to watch the races either outside on the balcony or inside, behind the glass windows, and have the PA piped in for people to hear. Who would have ever thought, I never would have as a youngster, that we would have all these amenities at racetracks that you see only at major sporting events like, NFL games now. So motorsports and racing have come a long way, and I'm just very thankful that I've been a part of it and been able to watch a small part of it growing up.
I know the first time I went to Knoxville, I know I sat on a board about that wide, in some bleachers.
Right now they have very nice aluminum seats at Knoxville, but they're not a lot wider than that. They're still pretty narrow, but I'll tell you what, they are going to be widening those because they have, they're putting in these new safety rails, the handrails that you see at all the modern speedways, and to accommodate those, they've got to cut down the size of the seating. So the seats are going to be increasing a couple of inches here in the next year or two to accommodate those handrails.
Good.
A little bit of improvement there, but it's going to be hard because during the Knoxville Nationals they come so close to selling out, and if you eliminate so many seats, where are those people going to watch the races? So that's one of the dilemmas the fair board has right now, is where they're going to put extra people.
Pay-per-view,
maybe.
You could make money doing that. But anyway, I liked one of your responses that you gave me on the phone. I asked you about this question, and you told me that there was a lady that was pretty hard to deal with, the weather.
Yeah, Mother Nature. You asked me on the telephone, who's the hardest person to deal with in the racing business? It has to be the weatherman, the Mother Nature, because you can pour all your heart and soul and advertising dollars, and everybody your family and your friends and the racers and officials and everybody just is all excited to come to a race and get the race on and put on a good show for people, and then you wake up and it's cloudy and the weatherman on the radio is saying there's a 50% chance of rain today and a 90% chance of rain tonight, and you think, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And you really just have to wait and see what God brings you with the weather, to see if it's going to be nice out, or if it's going to be a cloudy day, or if it is going to rain and you have to postpone. There's really not much you can do about the weather except for wait and see what God brings you.
Exactly. Bob, it's been a pleasure to be able to sit down and do this interview with you. And once again, let me congratulate you on being inducted into the C.A.R.B Hall of Fame. As I said before, it's just got to be a good feeling.
It is, and I tell you what, one thing that I wanted to make sure that I said is that I feel like I've been very fortunate in my lifetime around the racing business, the short track, dirt track racing business in the Kansas City area, and also in Knoxville and the different places I've worked, to be surrounded by a great group of people. A lot of them are people that are friends, family, C.A.R.B members, but race officials that have really gone above and beyond, put in extra hours to do extra scoring, to do long times in the flag stand, to do extra work on the racetracks, to getting the tracks graded and maintained. And the people I've met in advertising and radio and TV and newspaper that have guided me along the way and helped me craft commercials and advertisements that have helped attract people to come to the races. I've been very fortunate to be blessed with a family that's put up with all this, and also great friends that have helped put these races on so race fans can enjoy them. So it's been my pleasure, and I'm very honored to be a member of the C.A.R.B Hall of Fame.
Congratulations, Bob.
Thanks, Mike.
You got it.
All right.